you guys lunch into it. These guys have already gone through like 5 sessions and they're
Hi.
Hi,
I'm Laura Haberkamp. This is my class.
I'm George Figula. I'm emblazoned.
Yes. All right. So I gave them like a 30-second rundown of the Vietnam War because this is a world history class. They're freshmen. We haven't gotten that far in the curriculum. So I pointed to it on a map so you can fill them
That's
in
how I found it.
on all the stories. There you go.
Can you get them to squeeze
Okay.
in?
All right, guys. Can we make like another row here? And they'll move her feet here and we can get a little closer.
I don't know if my voice will reach way out there.
All right. Hi, Kaylee, and thank you behind there. We go. Awesome. Thank you. Okay, so I gave you a little bit of an intro in the classroom. Mr. Figula also had one student come through Kilbourne, 2 students come through Kilbourne, so a Kilbourne dad, U.S. Army veteran who enlisted in 1966. So there's a difference between enlisting and being drafted that I mentioned to them, right? Became an officer candidate the next year. He was a lieutenant when he went to Vietnam, which means definitely not those people who get bossed around as much, right? Promoted to captain in 1969, returned home in 1970, having been awarded a Purple Heart and a Bronze Star for his service. So thank you for being here with us, Mr. Figula.
You're welcome. Vera, you hear me okay? Okay. The only young lady I know, so I call her by name. Okay. 1961, I graduated from high school. High school. I went to OSU, stayed there for about 3 years. At that time, the draft was in effect, and if you were a reasonably healthy male individual, you got drafted, and not always sent to somewhere you really want to go. So I decided to enlist in the Army, and I went through basic training in Fort Gordon, Georgia, in the World War II barracks, which we thought would fall down every time we stepped through the door. After basic, I went to AIT, same Fort Gordon, learned to be an MP, military policeman. Now, when you enter the U.S. military service, they give you all kinds of tests, several batteries of tests to test your basic intelligence and your background and what educational level you have. Apparently, mine were good enough that I could apply for various schools. I tried to become a helicopter pilot, but they told me I had allergies, and that was not acceptable. The other thing I applied for was OCS, which is Officers Candidate School. Now, when I went into the Army, I got paid $87 a month. Sounds like a very little, but equivalent to $2,800 a month today. I figured I could get more than that. So OCS, became a second lieutenant, and I was making $300 a month. And I thought I was rich. I had my own car, I drove around post to post, and they sent me to Fort Knox for troop duty. After you become a commissioned lieutenant, they want you to have some experience with the troops, so they assign you and you're kind of there. Nobody pays too much attention to you because you're a second lieutenant, you're not supposed to know very much. As time goes on, you gain experience, you gain knowledge, and it's not a bad deal. They couldn't, as an officer, they couldn't assign KP to me. KP is kitchen police. It means you work in the scullery. You wash all the big pots and pans and all that type of stuff. So I didn't have to do that anymore. But as an officer, I was given certain responsibilities. And my young lady friend here, this is one of the responsibilities I ended up with. I was very unlucky the day this happened. We'll get to it shortly. Purple Heart, awarded for wounds in combat. Okay, second lieutenant, finally finished my troop duty and they assigned me to Vietnam. So a bunch of us going to Vietnam, which was an 18-hour flight from San Francisco or somewhere on the West Coast. And we're about 10 hours in, and one of the guys tells me, he says, hey, it's a good thing we're coming in Tet into Vietnam. Well, Tet is equivalent to Christmas to us. It's a very important holiday, and it's supposed to be peaceful. About 2 hours after he told me that, the pilot comes on the loudspeaker and says, we're diverting to the Philippines. Every airfield in Vietnam is under attack. I looked at my friend and said, oh joy, thank you. We get to Vietnam, landed at Cam Ranh Bay. Now Cam Ranh Bay is about the size of Franklin County as a military installation. There's not people all over the place, but it's that big, or was that big. And from there, they assigned you to various units in Vietnam. And the first time I was there, they assigned me to a civil affairs unit further up country. Now, my training was in civil affairs, which means I dealt directly with civilians as a military officer. As such, I was dealing directly with the Vietnamese. There was a team of us, we had maybe 6 guys on the team, and we go out and contact the civilians and interact and all that type of thing. It's more or less a PR to show that the Americans were good people and we'd buy you a new bridge if we blew the old one up. Well, I was about halfway through the first year. I got transferred into MACV, Military Advisory Command Vietnam, Military Advisory Command Vietnam, which means you're placed with the Vietnamese military as advisors. It turned out that the people we were supposed to advise and train had already just been trained and they didn't need our help, so we went on operations with them basically. It amounted to walking through various villages and showing the flag and that the Vietnamese military was on site and ready for action. As I'm speaking to you about this, other things that happened at the place and time come back and it gets a little confusing in the timeline. Okay, so I finished that out and I was slated to go back to the United States. And then they offered a program. If you extended a year, they would promote you from first lieutenant to captain. Okay, first month I was in the Army, I got $87 a month. As a second lieutenant, I got $300 a month. As a captain, I got $600 a month. So I'm looking at it monetarily and I'm thinking, yeah, I can use this money. Well, you were in country, you got a choice of one leave and one R&R. And at that time, R&R was in Tokyo, Hong Kong, Australia, or Thailand. So I chose Hong Kong. In the 2 years I was in Vietnam, I went to Hong Kong 5 different times. I got all tailor-made clothes, I bought a bunch of cameras. And today I can't fit in any of the clothes and none of the cameras are in date. They're all film cameras and where do you drop your film off to have it processed? None of them are digital. But it was a good time. Okay. Normal tour in Vietnam was 1 year. In my first year, I went to 2 different units. And since I extended for a year, I was told to call Washington, D.C. and find out where they would send me for my last year. I got home, I called up, and I says, where are you sending me? And he says, Fort Hood, Texas. There was a dead pause. He didn't laugh. He was kind enough not to do that. If you've ever been to Texas, it's wide open spaces. They're not joking. It's miles and miles of more miles and miles with a city here and a city there. Fort Hood, Texas was on the Mexican border, largest military installation in the United States. And it was more miles and miles of scorpions, lizards, and a bunch of ants. I didn't want to go to Fort Hood, Texas. So I said to the young man, I says, can I call you back tomorrow? He laughed. He had the decency to laugh because it was funny. And so I called him the next day and I says, can you send me back to Vietnam? I'd already been to Vietnam. It was okay duty, so I figured I'd do better in Vietnam than I would at Fort Hood, Texas. Now you got to remember, at that time, we had a lot of a lot of Americans who had served in Vietnam. And a lot were draftees. And when they got back to the States, all they wanted to do was get out. So if you were in for another 6 months, you saw a lot of times there were a disciplinary problem. You didn't care. They weren't going to keep you. So it was kind of traumatic to be in situations like that and try and direct people, because they just wanted out, and I couldn't blame them. So I got sent back to Vietnam, landed at Cam Ranh Bay again, and they says, where do you want to go? You've been here before. And I says, how about an American unit? So they sent me to the 1st Infantry Division. Division at that time was about 12,000 people. And since I was an armor officer, they sent me to the 1st Squadron, 4th Cavalry, which is about 1,000 guys, 800 to 1,000. They have tanks and armored personnel carriers. Armored personnel carriers is an aluminum box on 2 tracks. And they armed it with a heavy machine gun and 2 light machine guns, and they went on operations. And mostly it was a lot of convoy protection, where they'd go out and actually break through the jungle. With a 48-ton tank, not many trees will stand in the way. So the tanks would go through and we'd follow them, and we were looking for people to chase out of the woods and try and shoot them. On a 113, which is the armored personnel carrier, the way it was set up, you had a heavy machine gun on the turret in the middle of the vehicle, and then you had 2 side machine guns, and you rode on the back corners. They would they'd go to the salvage yard and take Jeep seats out of wrecks, and then they would strap them to the back in each corner. So in actuality, it's a pretty fun ride. It's like an open convertible with no sides to it. And you're riding on top, and hopefully they don't hit a big hole or a mine. We lost a lot of vehicles to mines. It would blow off a track mostly, although I did know the Air Force dropped a lot of bombs in Vietnam, and not all of them went off. The Viet Cong or the NVA, North Vietnamese Army, would find these buried bombs, dig them up, and haul them and make mines out of them. A mine is something you run over and it explodes. A 20-pound mine on a vehicle is not much, especially an armored vehicle. A 500-pound bomb is a big deal. One of our units went over an aluminum bridge, and there was a 500-pound bomb, and the NVA waited till the tank got halfway across and exploded it. It disintegrated the bridge and flipped the tank on its back. Everybody lived but one guy, and that was a shame because he had retired from the Army. He was a cook. Actually, he was a sergeant, and he ran the mess facilities, the food, the dining room. He was very good. He liked the GIs. He wanted to help them. And I had eaten in his mess hall several times. And it was really sad that he was the one who got killed. But in a combat unit, stuff like that happens. Where was I? Okay, we're tootling around in the outback, riding on armored vehicles. Now, if nobody's shooting at you and you're really not trying to shoot at them, it's really a lot of fun. It's like, these off-road vehicles. If any of you have ever been off-road in a Jeep or something, that's what you do. It's fun to bomb around on dirt roads and go over hills and all that type of stuff. When you're looking for people to try and shoot them and that type of thing. It's not much fun, but it could be. It was a good experience in some ways, many ways actually. You made a lot of friends. As long as you weren't shot at too much, it was a good deal. It sounds kind of odd to say that, but it was at the time. Because your whole idea is to line up and charge something or other and shoot it at each other. And if you don't have to do that, it's a pretty good deal. Now what? Okay. The military, depending on your personality, if you're willing to keep your mouth shut, listen, and then contribute, you can do very well. You, for example, could go in as a private, work your way up to a sergeant, apply for OCS or a commission, and become an officer. And there's a lot of perks involved, meaning there's a lot of things that are available to you if you're willing to take the responsibility to handle it. Or you can keep your mouth shut, do your time, and get out. Now, one thing about military service, as you age, your body starts to fail. It's just natural aging. And some of that could be connected with military service. So you can go down the VA and the medical care is free. Or you can go into the military and earn a degree, either while you're there or after on the government subsidies. You can get your education pretty much paid for. If you're ornery, don't like to be told what to do, I'd strongly suggest you not go into the military. If you're smart enough to keep your mouth shut and listen and learn, you can do very well in the military. A lot of guys go in for 20 years, get out, and then they do something else. They get paid by the government on retirement, and if they're working in civilian life, they're making a lot more money than they normally would. It can be very lucrative, and it can be a very bad experience unless you go with the program. Sort of like high school here. Keep your mouth shut, do your work, nobody bothers you. If you act up, you run into teachers like mean ones like this one right here. And she'll put you in your place or throw your ass out of school. You can make it work for you or not. I made it work for me. I don't regret it. If I had to do it over again, I wouldn't hesitate. I was lucky. I got one of these. It wasn't serious, but it was legitimate. And
What else did you get?
what, decorations? Bronze Star. 2 of them. Hey, I was there. With what?
Valor?
Well, yeah.
Tell them the difference between
Okay. A Bronze Star you can win for meritorious service, which means you open the door for the colonel and make sure you didn't shut his foot in the door. That's a Bronze Star for meritorious service. If it's got an oak leaf cluster on it, it means you got more than one. Now, if you have a V on that Bronze Star, that's for valor. And as she said, I got 2 of them. I was there at the wrong time, or the right time as the case may be. All my limbs work, so I guess it was okay.
Tell them how you got the Purple Heart and what you were reading.
Okay. It's not unknown for military personnel to do extremely dumb things when they're in the military. My unit, the Armored Cavalry, we had a bunch of tanks.
George, speak up for the back.
Okay, can you guys hear me out there?
Your screen.
Okay, my voice is giving out. Thank you, dear.
Yeah, girl.
Or should I say mother? Where was I?
So, military people do extremely stupid things.
Okay, I got it. All right, in Vietnam they had fire bases, which means they push up a bunch of dirt, there's a circle, and they put artillery pieces in it. And they usually have a company or half company of infantry to guard because the artillery people are busy shooting the guns, and the infantry will run patrols outside the fire base and rest up because they've been out in the field for 3 or 4 months. Okay, so there's this fire base, infantry company, and then we come into town, and we've got maybe 20 armored vehicles. Now, one thing about armored vehicles is when you run them over the ground, the tracks will tear up the ground. And by the time we got done, there wasn't a blade of grass within 100 yards of that fire base. And so what we would do at night is we would circle the fire base, our vehicles are pointing out, and we'd post guards and all this type of stuff. For some reason, 20 armored vehicles with more guns than God, a fire base with 6 artillery pieces, and a company of infantry, and the VC tries to attack us, which was totally stupid.
Who is the VC?
VC stands for Viet Cong. They were the locals who at night would run out and try and shoot people, blow up things. And then the NVA was the North Vietnamese Army. And they would come down as complete units and operate against the Americans and the South Vietnamese troops.
So the VCs were like complete guerrilla warfare.
Yeah, traditional guerrilla warfare. It could be your neighbor, it could be the guy down the street, but at night they would run around and try and blow up things. Okay, we're on the fire base, it's nighttime, and we're all pointing out, and the VC decide to attack. Before the attack happened, excuse me, I decided it was a good time to read a book. Now, the one thing you don't do is show a light in a position at night, because you can be seen for miles. So I got the idea that since I'm in the middle, I got a book and I got a red flashlight holding it very close to the book. I am very sure that nobody could see it from the outside. That was my bet. However, the VC decided to attack. Why, I don't know. It's completely stupid. But they did. And I'm sitting there reading my book on the back corner of a track. And out of my eye, I see this like a Roman candle come. Now, when we'd set up an armored vehicle at night, we'd drive in engineer stakes about 15 feet in front of the vehicle and string chain link fence. Chain link fence is designed to catch an RPG round, rocket propelled grenade. If you've been watching the Israeli stuff, it's that thing that the Palestinians like to shoot at the Israelis. It's a shoulder fired, the rocket's about that long. Shoot it at night, it's really pretty if it's going out. If you see it coming in, it's not so pretty. And out of the corner of my eye, I saw this thing hit the fence of the vehicle next to me. It blew up, fragments off that hit me, and that's why that exists. And I rolled into the vehicle and I'm looking, I'm feeling for a wound. It penetrated, but not very deep, so it was a very light wound. I was in the colonel's vehicle. He gets up. He doesn't, he's totally from a dead sleep. I made him put his flak jacket on. He gets on the radio and starts controlling the battle. I never read at night after that. The book I was reading I thought was very humorous. It's called Ayn Rand's The Fountainhead. It's about that thick. And people who have degrees in education or in literature or English or whatever, The Fountainhead is an iconic book that most people don't read these days. I still don't know what it's about to this day.
Did you ever finish it?
No. Apparently the favorite story that I tell is about a second lieutenant. Now, not all people who go into the Army are qualified to be there. And a lot of times you don't know that until you actually work with them and they work with you. In the ROTC, Reserve Officers Training Course in college, you can go through that program and become an officer. One of our company officers was an ROTC grad, and he was kept in the base camp because nobody trusted him to leave the base camp. He did not have any supervision responsibility. He was there mostly for grunt work, doing filing and so forth. Well, he's still an officer, and the base camp we were on runs about 10,000 people in the camp, and it's maybe 4 miles in diameter. And the Vietnamese, or the VC, and the anyway, the enemy, the Kong, what they would do is they would back off about a mile, and they would set up a cross leg and lay a rocket on it. Rocket's about 5 inches in diameter and about 6 feet long. They'd set a long fuse, they'd light it and run like hell, because we would try and bring artillery fire on their positions after we found out we were being rocketed. Anyway, these rockets had come in, and the chances of getting hit were very small. People did get hit. Our mail clerk, we laughed at him because he got these rocket boxes. They were about that long, this wide and that deep, and he'd fill them with dirt and he'd put them around his bunk. Well, his shack got hit in the corner of the building and threw shrapnel or fragments down, and some hit the boxes, so he was prudent in that respect. We didn't laugh at him anymore because it was a good idea, and we wish we would have thought of it. But anyway, in a rocket attack, almost nothing ever got hit of importance. But everybody would run for the bunkers because they'd sound a siren, and you'd get in the bunker and wait for the all clear and all that. And one particular night, I remember the rocket attack was announced by the rocket exploding. Then you heard the alert signal, and everybody's running for a bunker. All I did is I got out of a dead sleep. I'm sitting on all fours on the bunk. I turned around like a dog, and I said a very bad word and went back to sleep, because there was no sense. The rocket attack was over. But during one of those attacks, our young lieutenant friend it was a rocket attack. The rockets went off. He's running through the trees and he fell in a hole. Now, it was about waist deep, maybe chest high. And in Vietnam, they were called latrines. They were wooden shacks about from that pillar to this pillar. And they had several holes cut. They had a half barrel, a 50-gallon barrel, underneath each hole. And that's where you did your business. What would happen is they would pull these half barrels out, douse them with diesel fuel, and light them up. If you talk to a lot of Vietnam vets, they'll tell you that the base camps had a black cloud of smoke, and that's what they were doing. They were burning shit. When it burned down, they would dump it in a hole. And the rains would come and fill up the hole with water and residue, and our young lieutenant friend was running through the woods in a rocket attack, and he fell in up to here in liquid shit. We all thought it was hilarious. He didn't, but we did. We hosed him off, got him new clothes, and he was fine. But we often tell the story to each other that don't run through the woods. Know where you're going. Otherwise, you're going to end up in deep doo-doo. But it was a humorous story. Anybody got any questions? 10 minutes? Okay, we got about 10 minutes, so.
I just remembered that Claymore story you told me about at night, what they would do, and then how you solve that problem. That's pretty, and then what that even is.
Okay, what she's talking about is in a night defensive position, you'd run out a Claymore. A Claymore is a directional mine. It's about that big, weighs a couple of pounds, about that thick. It's got little feet. You'd set that up in about 50 yards of wire, and you'd have a detonator in your hand that you'd hook up. Now, the the Vietnamese Vietnamese communists were actually some very good troops. These guys would sneak up and they'd turn the claymore around, pointing back at you, and you wouldn't know it. That happened a couple of times, and it wasn't very nice on the receiving end, but we learned a lesson.
What does the claymore do when it?
Okay. A claymore mine, like I said, is about that big. It has something like 200 ball bearings in the face of it with an explosive sheet in the back. So when you fired it, it would blow those steel balls in a fan about like that straight out.
What would that do to someone standing?
It would shred a person. If you're like 10, 15 feet away, it would just physically shred the whole body. So if the enemy turns it around pointing back at you, it's not a very pleasant idea. So what we would do is we'd take some fluorescent tape and put it on the back of the mine, set the mine out so you can see those two little eyes and know that it hadn't been turned around. The enemy against us was very, very dedicated. They were so dedicated that in North Vietnam, they would get a bicycle, put 400 pounds of rice on it, and push it about 500 miles to the tip of South Vietnam just to deliver 10 pounds of rice. But the physical effort to push a bicycle 400 pounds of rice, 400, 500 miles is incredible. We had a lot of respect for that kind of dedication.
On your nightlife, okay, like you got R&R at Hong Kong. The boys just want to go have a beer and meet chicks. What was that like?
Well, in South Vietnam, there weren't any chicks. What do you mean?
The exploits of a off-duty military man in Vietnam.
Mostly, okay.
Bottle services you had.
Okay.
What was that nightlife like? You're how old now? Most kids are about 18 to 25.
Yeah. How old am I now? Or then? I was like 24, 26. Okay, she's asking what the nightlife was. Okay, in Vietnam, you had a enlisted men's club. Anybody not an officer would have a club. A club is where you had cheap beer. I think beer was like 15 or 20 cents a bottle. And that would perpetuate the club. The more beer you buy, the more beer you can buy. Did they over imbibe? You bet. You're 18, 19 years old. Maybe you have a very boring job, but you can't just drive down to the big city and have entertainment. So every military post has clubs, enlisted, non-commissioned officers club, and then officers club. It's just like a club in the States or a bar in the States. Booze was a lot cheaper. It was all in steel beer cans because we had a special gizmo to pop the top. Aluminum cans were just coming in at that time. Okay. I'm trying to remember what I was like in high school, and we always thought we were heavy drinkers and like 3 beers and we're drunker than skunks. But you live and learn.
Can you talk about what the Vietnamese villages are going through? Prostitution got legalized. Women, like, tell them more.
Huh?
Tell them about how Vietnam legalized prostitution.
Well, I don't think anybody legalized it, but you're not going to stop it.
So what was that like?
Like prostitution anywhere. The girls gave you that come hither look and you said how much and
how hard was it to keep these guys STD clean?
It paid to be a friend of the medic. Because if you got an STD, a sexually transmitted disease, it could go on your record and you were a bad boy and all this type of horseshit.
Tell a story of the guy who kept getting gonorrhea or whatever
Oh,
all over again and again and again, and they couldn't figure
okay.
out why it's not working.
In my civil affairs course, we had a medical officer come and relate some of the diseases that you're going to run into if you're not careful. And they had this one guy who kept turning up with an STD, a sexually transmitted
Everyone wants to know,
disease.
was it gonorrhea or the clown?
I don't remember. I didn't check him. Anyway, this guy kept turning up with the disease, so they'd fill his butt full of penicillin, clean him up, and then he'd go right back. It turned out he was visiting the same girl that I think he went through like 4 times before they shipped him somewhere in self-defense. The problem with prostitution in Vietnam is the girls, they would, for whatever reason they went into prostitution, they would go to the local pharmacy and buy penicillin. Yeah, in many foreign countries, it's over-the-counter stuff. You can buy it. Here, you have to have a prescription. But what they would do is they would dilute it with water, thinking that's going to help. And all they did is create a resistant strain of the STD. So we had a lot of problems with that. And the various divisions there, the division's about 12,000 people, they would set up their own whorehouse and make sure the medical personnel would go down and check. That happened until congressman came in and says, you can't do that. These are pure American boys. You can't have a little whorehouse over here. And we're all saying, why not?
One last question story. Before you deployed, you're now a captain, and they have like balls, right? Dances. And you were new into town. Can you talk about that? You sly dog.
I think I was a lieutenant at the time stationed at Fort Knox. I didn't have a girlfriend. Didn't particularly want one because they can cause you a lot of problems. But the battalion commander said, you will attend the formal ball. That means I had to put on my pretty blue suit with all this brass and everything, but I didn't have a date. So being a young lieutenant with some imagination, I went to the phone book and looked up models. I figure models are good. So I took the first one, and it was named Alex Adams. Now, the lady who ran the modeling agency chose AA as initials because it was the first one in the book under model. So she says, I have one young lady whom I would trust to do this. Can you come back on such and such a day? And I said, sure. I show up. Here's this professional model. She stood about yay high, but absolutely gorgeous. I says, this is what I need you here this date, formal dress and all that. So I picked her up. I took her to the dance. I walked in, and you would have thought I had Miss America because all these young lieutenants just, hi, how are you? Get away. Leave my girl alone.
And when the date was over, what happened to her?
What happened to what?
What happened to your date when the night was
over? Okay, I ended up marrying the young lady.
You married her?
Lasted 2 years.
Thank you.
Thank you.